Whenever the subject of veneering comes up, it conjures up negative thoughts. People might think that it's an inferior product. And from a woodworker's perspective, you might think that you need new and expensive tools. The reality is quite the opposite. I'm Steve Dergarabedian and I run Black Walnut Studio. I'm also the author of Veneering Essentials. Learning to veneer is a great skill to have in your arsenal. Some of the best woods are turned into veneer, and there are some that I wouldn't want to work with, like this walnut burl, unless it is a veneer. The other advantage to veneering is that it virtually eliminates wood movement. In this short little video, I'm going to show you how to make this veneer tray, including adding some feet to the bottom. Once you have the skills to make this tray, it's very easily transferable to make other trays, boxes, even veneered cabinets. When it comes time to applying your veneers, there are several different ways of doing it, and each will have its pros and cons. There's the more traditional method of using hot hide glue, but I find that that has a bit of a learning curve. You can mechanically press your veneers, either with clamps or a veneer press, and this can be scaled up to a much larger size. My favorite way of pressing veneers is using vacuum. Now, if you're going to do this a lot, a system like this does make sense. It costs about $1,200 to $1,500, and that might be the disadvantage for the weekend veneerist. There's a much more economical way of vacuum veneering though, and that's using the Roll Rocket thin air press. And that's because you provide the pump to pump the air out of a small bag like this. Now, there is one other method that I want to show you, and you probably already have the tools to do this. The method that I'm talking about uses a clothes iron to make iron-on veneer. Now you can go to a big box store and buy iron-on veneer, or even the versions that you peel and stick. The problem with these are they use veneers that are very plain and lack any sort of character. We're going to use a clothes iron that can reach at least 200 degrees Celsius, that's the cotton setting, some PVA glue like Type-On Original, some hardware, the feet, and some interesting veneer like this curly cherry or the sequence matched walnut. We're going to make a tray that you're going to be proud to bring out and serve food on. So there are a few things to tackle before we get started. The first has to do with the core. In this case, I'm using Baltic birch, but you could easily substitute MDF for this project. Stay away from things like melamine or particle board. They don't work as well. Whenever I'm sizing my project, I always size it a ½ inch to an inch longer and wider than what I need. You'll notice that I put the grain direction of this plywood. One of the rules of veneering is that we need to veneer perpendicular to the grain underneath. The other rule of veneering is that we need to veneer both sides. Once I've cut my plywood to size, I use it as the template to cut my veneers. The other point to tackle is the adhesives. Any PVA glue will work for this method, including Type-On 2, Type-On 3, even Type-On cold press for veneer. My favorite is Type-On Original yellow glue for one specific reason. We need to apply the glue and let it dry, and then we iron it on to the substrate. If you're going to use one of these 3 glues, you need to do this within 24 hours. Type-On Original Yellow allows you to wait up to a week or even longer before you need to do the ironing. Now that we have all the particulars out of the way, let's cover our bench, gather our supplies, and get started. We're going to apply glue to one side of each piece of veneer and both sides of the plywood because we're going to veneer both sides. As soon as we apply adhesive to one side of the veneer, it's going to want to curl. We're going to stop that in a couple of ways. First, we're going to lightly mist the veneer, and then we're going to tape it down so the corners don't lift up. Now we can start to apply our adhesive. When applying the glue, you want to make sure that there are no dry spots nor any puddles of glue. And now that we've applied the glue, it's much like watching grass grow, we have to wait for it to dry. You'll know when it's dry when you can no longer leave your fingerprint in any of the surfaces. In some shops that might take a couple hours, in other shops it might take a bit longer. Now that the glue has dried on both the veneers and the plywood, take your iron, plug it in, put it on the cotton setting, and we'll be ready to create some magic. You're not going to need any water for this. Once your iron has reached at least 200 degrees Celsius, take one of your veneers, glue side down, place it on the plywood, and now starting at one end, iron it on. You don't want to go too fast, and you don't want to hold it in one position for too long. If you find that the iron is sticking rather than sliding, you can use craft paper as an in-between between the iron and the veneers. It doesn't take long before the veneer is attached to the plywood. Feel around to see if there are any bubbles, and you can take care of those with the iron again. Once this side is adhered, flip it over and do the exact same thing on the other side. Glue side down, start at one corner, and work your way to the other side. Now that both sides are ironed on, we want to let this cool down so that the glue can do its job. You don't want to lay this flat on your bench. Instead, you want to prop it up so that air movement gets all around it. Now, it's very tempting to come in and chip away at the veneer that's overhanging the core. Don't do it just yet. We're going to clean it up in the next few steps. Once the panel has cooled completely, we need to clean up one edge so that we can take it to the table saw and dimension our tray. The easiest way to get rid of this veneer overhang is not with your finger, as tempting as that is, but rather with a file. You don't want to use the teeth on the face of the file, but rather the ones on the edge. When you're cutting the veneer, make sure that you cut on the push stroke rather than the pull stroke. And if you haven't cleaned up this edge yet, make sure that you angle your file. After using the file on this edge, if you notice that it's not quite flat, you can joint it either with a jack plane or take it to the power jointer and joint it there. Using the table saw, we can now cross-cut and rip our tray to dimension. Using a blade that's meant for veneering cuts much better. Now that our tray is cut to size, there are several different methods we can use to put on an edging. You can go with the previous method of creating iron-on veneering to apply the edging, with the same veneer or something that's contrasting. You can also take thin strips of solid wood and apply the edging with a combination of cauls and clamps. I had some leftover roasted maple and thinned it down to 1/8 thick. I'm going to lay the short edges on first, cut and trim those, and then put on the long edges. There's no need to miter them or dovetail them for that matter. And I'm a huge proponent of using white glue for these kinds of glue ups because white glue dries translucent. When you're putting on your edging, make sure that you have overhang on the sides as well as the top and bottom. Once the glue is cured, we can trim off the ears with a saw and flush the edging to the veneer with a block plane. When using a block plane to trim the edging to the veneered surface, you want to be careful that you don't cut into the veneer. You want to leave it just a little bit proud, and we'll clean it up further with some sanding. One of the things that I like to do is add 1 or 2 pieces of masking tape to the front corner, and that'll ensure that I don't mar the veneer. Now we'll just repeat the same steps for the longer edges. Now we can start to clean up the tray by first hand planing the edges. The last step to cleaning up is using a random orbit sander on the 2 faces of the tray. Remember, we're working with thin veneer, and the key to not sanding through veneer is to actually not sand through the veneer. You don't have to start at a really rough grit. I'm starting off with 180, and if it feels smooth at that point, I might not even go to the 220. There are times where I do go a little bit finer depending on the finish that you're going to use, and in those cases I'm typically stopping at 220, possibly 240. If there are any sort of small defects, I'll do those with hand sanding. That way I can be assured that I'm not going to sand through veneer. The last step before applying a finish is to locate the holes for the feet. These feet are available from Lee Valley Tools, and they require a 1/4 inch diameter hole that is a 1/4 of an inch deep. I've put masking tape so as not to mar my freshly sanded surface. I'll use a ruler to locate them exactly, use an awl to do a pinpoint, and then head to the drill press with a 1/4 inch brad point bit. Now that I've located my holes, I'm going to remove the masking tape And I've cut some 1/4-inch dowels all to the same height. This is going to do two things. I'll insert them into the holes where the feet go, and that will not only stop finish from going into the holes, but it'll also raise the bottom up so I can apply finish to all sides at one time. Any finish will work on this tray. I'm going with Osmo Top Oil because food might come into contact with this, and I want to make sure that I stay safe. Once the finish is cured, remove the temporary dowels and get ready to glue in the feet. I like to use epoxy for this. I've got some 5-minute epoxy. I'll mix it up, and then using a combination of cork cawls on the other side and some spring clamps, I'll make sure that those stay seated while the epoxy cures. Now that the epoxy has cured, we can put our tray to use. I really hope that you found veneering to be a fun way of woodworking. And there's much more to this. We've created a small rectangular tray, but there's nothing stopping you from changing the shape, as in this tea tray, or even making boxes such as this one or this one that'll hold teas and even the cups that you can drink with. I also made a different version using candy stripe Padauk for the panel of this tray. If you want to investigate this more and find out some of the other methods of veneering, including the adhesives, some of the other tools that you can not only buy but make, take a look at Veneering Essentials that's available from Lee Valley Tools. I really hope that you try veneering. It's going to open up a whole new palette of colors, species, and grains that you just can't sometimes get with solid wood.